The Israel-Hamas conflict has once again escalated to some of its most intense levels in recent months, with reports coming out of Gaza City that the Israeli Defense Forces have significantly ramped up their ground and aerial assaults. This comes as the war, which has been raging on and off for years, takes yet another tragic turn. One of the most devastating reports to emerge is that several children were killed in a strike on a school, a place that is supposed to represent safety and shelter in times of conflict. The images and testimonies from the ground show a city struggling under relentless bombardment, with families forced to flee while others remain trapped in areas where the fighting is at its heaviest. The IDF's operation in Gaza City is being described as one of the most concentrated offensives in recent memory. Tanks, infantry, and air support are being used in coordination to target what Israel says are Hamas strongholds embedded within densely populated civilian neighborhoods. Israel's justification centers on Hamas' use of civilian infrastructure, like schools and hospitals, as shields for its operations. According to the IDF, many of their targets are tied directly to Hamas command centers, weapons stockpiles, or tunnel networks hidden beneath the city. But the undeniable consequence is the loss of civilian lives, particularly among children, who have no part in the fighting yet pay the heaviest price. Witness accounts describe the bombing campaign as relentless. Explosions light up the night sky, while the sound of drones and fighter jets overhead adds to the sense of constant fear. The physical destruction is staggering. Apartment blocks reduced to rubble, roads torn apart, and key infrastructure like water pipelines and power lines obliterated. Each strike leaves behind not only dust and debris, but also the anguished cries of families searching for loved ones. Humanitarian organizations on the ground warn that Gaza's already fragile health system is collapsing under the pressure, with hospitals overflowing and medical supplies running dangerously low. The attack on the school highlights one of the most painful dilemmas of this war. Israel argues that Hamas has long used civilian buildings as cover, embedding fighters and weapons in places where children and families seek refuge. Hamas denies this, pointing instead to Israel's pattern of strikes on civilian infrastructure as evidence of disproportionate force. International observers and rights groups have repeatedly called for restraint, stressing that the protection of children and schools should be a red line, regardless of military objectives. The tragic reality is that in such a crowded and besieged territory, the line between military target and civilian casualty is often blurred beyond recognition. From Israel's perspective, the escalation in Gaza City is aimed at dismantling Hamas' command and control structure. The IDF is relying heavily on precision airstrikes, guided by real-time intelligence, combined with ground troops moving neighborhood by neighborhood to clear suspected militants and tunnels. These tunnels, often described as a vast underground network, are seen by Israel as the backbone of Hamas operations. By targeting them, Israel hopes to weaken the group's ability to launch rockets into Israeli cities and to disrupt their mobility within Gaza. However, the very design of this urban warfare fighting in one of the most densely populated areas in the world makes civilian casualties almost unavoidable. For people in Gaza, the reality is catastrophic. Over half the population are children, and many of them have now experienced not just the fear of bombardment, but also direct loss. Parents describe their children waking up screaming at night, unable to sleep, and suffering from severe trauma. The strike on the school only deepens the collective despair, as families who believed they had found a safe shelter now face unbearable grief. Aid agencies report that displaced families are crammed into overcrowded shelters, with scarce access to food, water, or medical care. The humanitarian situation is being described as reaching a breaking point, with international calls for a ceasefire growing louder each day. Meanwhile, within Israel, the government emphasizes the need to continue military pressure until Hamas is significantly weakened. Officials argue that pausing the assault would only give Hamas time to regroup and prepare new attacks. Many Israelis still live under the constant threat of rockets launched from Gaza, and the public expects the military to provide security by dismantling the source of those attacks. But as images of civilians suffering from Gaza spread worldwide, Israel faces increasing diplomatic pressure. Countries in the region and beyond are urging negotiations and humanitarian pauses, while protests erupt in major cities calling for an end to the bloodshed. The war has also intensified debates globally about the ethics of modern warfare, particularly when one side is a state military with advanced weaponry, and the other is an armed group embedded within a civilian population. Military analysts describe the IDF's tactics as a classic case of urban warfare complexities, where technological superiority can achieve battlefield victories, but risks eroding moral and political standing. The deaths of children in schools and other supposed safe havens strike a deep emotional chord worldwide, raising questions about how wars are fought in such environments and what limits should be imposed. At the core of this conflict remains the unresolved question of how to balance Israel's security concerns with the rights and safety of Palestinians in Gaza. Without a political solution, each cycle of violence seems to repeat with increasing intensity. The assault on Gaza City represents not just another military campaign, but also another chapter in a story marked by suffering, displacement, and trauma for generations on both sides. While Israel frames its actions as a necessary defense against Hamas, and Hamas portrays itself as resisting occupation, the reality on the ground is one of civilians, particularly children, bearing the consequences of decisions made far beyond their control. In the end, the ramped-up assault, the destruction of neighborhoods, the use of schools as shelters, and the tragic deaths of children reveal the harsh truths of this conflict. It is a war fought not only with bombs and rockets, but also in the lives and futures of innocent people, caught between two forces unwilling to compromise. The events in Gaza City today will not just shape the immediate military landscape, but will leave lasting scars on a population already enduring decades of hardship. The world is watching, but for those living it, the war is not a headline, it is their reality.